Today in state history, we're going to be talking about some famous Connecticut people. So I'm going to show you some people. We're going to learn about 12 different people today, 12 famous Connecticut people. Here we have Jonathan Trumbull Sr. Jonathan Trumbull Sr., he was the first governor of Connecticut. Jonathan Trumbull was born in Lebanon, Connecticut, and he was educated at Harvard College. He served as deputy governor of the colony of Connecticut. He was also a colonel in the Connecticut militia. He was a friend and he was an advisor of George Washington, and he helped dedicate resources to Connecticut to fight for the War for Independence. So he helped get Connecticut the title of Provision State. And he was the first governor of Connecticut, so he's important. The next guy we're talking about is Eli Terry. You can see he doesn't look as happy, but the cool thing about Eli Terry was that at age 14, he had to get an apprentice under a clockmaker. Now, back then, they would learn a trade pretty early in their teenage years that they would do for the rest of their life. So at 21, he opened his own clock shop. Back then, only the rich people could really afford clocks. And so he worked with ways to make clocks affordable for everybody. That's what he's famous for. Back then, iron was so expensive, so they made their clocks entirely from wood. He was famous for making more clocks at a lower cost, but they're still beautiful, but they were affordable. And he opened his clock shop, and he operated that until he died in 1852, but he really helped make clocks affordable. The next guy we're talking about is Charles Goodyear. Charles Goodyear, I don't know if you have heard of Goodyear tires, but he was famous because you know how we have rubber trees? He was famous for making practical uses for rubber because rubber, now we have it on a lot of different things. You think of your erasers, you think of some of the bottoms of the soles of your shoes, but a lot of times back then the rubber would just crack, and so he was able to make natural rubber into a useful item that could withstand heat. Because what would happen is with natural rubber, he tried to make shoes out of them, and then they just got extremely hard, and then they cracked. So he was able to make it useful, and what happened is he accidentally mixed some natural rubber with sulfur and on a hot stove, and he created something amazing, vulcanized rubber. And he actually was trying so many things that he was hurting his health by looking for these different ways, and then he accidentally discovered this after working really hard, and so he was able to make some useful rubber things for us. And in 1898, the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company was founded, and in 1976 he was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. The next person we're talking about is Ella Grasso. I know her name only because I used to drive down Ella Grasso Road, and I thought, I wonder who this Ella Grasso is. Ella Grasso, she was alive in 1919 through 1981. So she was alive during the Second World War, and during the Second World War, she served as assistant director for the research for War Manpower Commission of the Connecticut House of Representatives, and she was the first woman elected floor leader. She was Secretary of State. She was first woman chair. She was elected in 1971 through 1975, but in 1974 she was actually elected governor. So that's some interesting information about Ella Grasso. Our next person that we're going to learn about is Charles Ives. Charles Ives, he was famous for being a state composer. He opened a large and successful insurance agency, but he also composed music in Danbury. He actually wrote almost 200 songs, symphonies, tone poems, and he was given the Pulitzer Prize in 1947 and designated state composer in 1991. His father actually was a famous Civil War bandmaster. Our next guy, oh sorry, this is Charles Ives. Did I show you El Grasso? Now, our next guy is Israel Putnam. He lived most of his life as a farmer, and then in 1755, he became a lieutenant colonel of militia in the Rogers Rangers. On April 20th of 1775, Putnam received news of the Battle of Lexington. Remember Lexington and Concord? The energetic patriot mounted a horse at the stable that he might himself spread the alarm. After Lexington and Concord, Putnam hastened to Boston and became colonel of a Connecticut regiment and brigadier of Connecticut militia. He was one of the two principal commanders at the Battle of Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill, where he gave the famous order, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." Congress appointed him as one of the original major generals in the Continental Army. Our next guy we're talking about is you might know him, Nathan Hale. Nathan Hale. Remember him? He was actually made Connecticut's state hero in 1985, but you know he was born way before that. He was born in Coventry, went to Yale University. He was a teacher until he was commissioned as captain of the Continental Army in 1775. In 1776, as the request of General Washington for a volunteer, Hale crossed enemy lines to go on a dangerous mission to gather information as to the strength and plans of the British Army. Unfortunately, when he was returning back, he was caught, and they hanged him as a spy on September 22nd without even giving him a trial. He was famous for these words where he said, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." And he was a great patriot that gave his life for our country. Let's talk about Prudence Crandall. She was a state heroine, and in 1995, she became Connecticut's state heroine. In 1833, she established the first academy for African American women in New England. During its 18 months of operation, Crandall and her students faced hardships and violence because we've talked about how people were very prejudiced against other races. She was placed on trial twice for breaking a law specifically designed to prevent school from operating. In the fall of 1834, even though the charges were dismissed, her school got closed down. Prudence Crandall demonstrated great courage and moral strength in her stand against prejudice and against prejudice. Our next person we're going to be talking about is Noah Webster. Noah Webster, he's a famous American lexicographer, textbook author, reformer, political writer, word enthusiast, and editor. He is the father of American scholarship and education, and you know him from his blueback speller. And he taught 5 generations of children in the United States how to spell and read. And his name, when you think of Noah Webster, you think of the dictionary usually, especially the modern Merriam-Webster dictionary that was published in 1828 as an American dictionary of the English language. It's about this thick and this big. It's huge. Though it now has an honored place in the history of American English, Webster's first dictionary only sold 2,500 copies. He was forced to mortgage his home to bring out a second edition. On May 28, 1843, after revising an appendix to the second edition, he died. and most of his dictionaries weren't even recognized yet, his efforts, which is crazy because now tons of us have dictionaries, and what would we do without a dictionary? So he had great work with a dictionary. Now we just know him for a dictionary, but when he died, he wasn't even well known for it or famous for that. Our next guy is Samuel Colt, and Samuel Colt was an American inventor and industrialist. I feel like the boys will like him. He was the founder of the Colt Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company, and it was widely credited with popularizing the revolver. Colt would eventually purchase a large tract of land beside the Connecticut River, where he built a factory, a manor, and housing. He established a 10-hour workday for employees, installed washing stations, had a 1-hour lunch break, so he was good with his employees. And this is Samuel Colt. Our next person is Harriet Beecher Stowe, and she wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. She was an American abolitionist and novelist, and she attacked the idea of the cruelty of slavery. It reached millions as a novel and play and became influential even in Britain. It made political issues of the 1850s regarding slavery real to millions, energizing anti-slavery forces in the American North. It angered and embittered the South. So basically, she wrote this book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, talking about how bad slavery was. And when people read this, the South was angry because, the South had slaves, and the North thought, we need to fight this, and that's why they were called abolitionists. And what happened is, later on, after the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln came up to her and said, "Oh, so you're the little woman who wrote the book who started the war." So yeah, she was famous for writing this Uncle Tom's Cabin that caused a huge reaction to slavery, which is good because we needed to get rid of slavery. During her life, she wrote poems and travel books, biographical sketches, children's books, and books for adults. And that is Harriet Beecher Stowe. Our next person our last person, you might know him, Phineas Taylor Barnum. Oh, ladies and gents, waiting for it, just kidding. This is Phineas Barnum, or P.T. Barnum, an American showman, best remembered for his entertaining hoaxes and for founding the circus that eventually became the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. I don't know why this is completely off topic. Well, it's not, but how it said he was famous for his entertaining hoaxes. Do you know how many times it's like at the fair where it'll say, pay $1 to see an 18-inch woman, or see a 1-foot-long spider, or something that is like not exactly true, and then you'll pay the money for it? I feel like I do sometimes just because I'm curious, and I know it's fake. I know that's so dumb. Anyways, Barnum was born in Bethel, Connecticut, one of 10 children. He was very good at arithmetic, but he hated physical work. Barnum started as a storekeeper, and he learned how to haggle. He struck hard bargains and using deception to make a deal. In addition to circus and museum, one of his innovations was a national competition. He organized flower shows, beauty contests, dog shows, poultry contests, but the most popular were baby contests. How interesting to hear about all these different people today and what made them famous in Connecticut. I hope you learned something today, or at least were entertained about some of the people that we learn in Connecticut history.